You're standing in your kitchen looking at your gas stove. The stove your grandmother cooked on. The stove that's been the heart of your kitchen for decades. And the government is telling you it needs to go. Why? Because of your carbon footprint. Because cooking with gas contributes to climate change. Because your personal choices need to be controlled to save the planet. They want you to drive an electric vehicle even though the electricity comes from power plants burning fossil fuel. They want you to replace your appliances with less reliable, more expensive alternatives. They want to track your energy usage, your travel, your consumption. They want to assign you a carbon budget and penalize you when you exceed it. This is not about saving the environment. This is about control. This is about the government using climate hysteria to impact or to insert itself into every aspect of your life. This is creating a system where your behavior is constantly monitored and restricted based on arbitrary standards that have nothing to do with actual environmental impact. And it's getting worse. Way worse. The rhetoric around carbon footprints has reached levels of absurdity that make the COVID nonsense look reasonable by comparison. At least during COVID, they were claiming there was an immediate public health emergency. Now, they're claiming that your gas stove and your pickup truck are going to destroy the planet in 50 years, unless they're allowed to control every aspect of how you live. They pushed lockdowns, masks, vaccine mandates, all in the name of public health. They destroyed small businesses. They kept kids out of school. They violated basic rights and freedoms. And when it was over, when the data came in, it turned out they were wrong about almost everything. The measures didn't work. The predictions were false. The cure was way worse than the disease. But did they learn? Did they back off? Did they admit they overreached? No. They just moved on to the next crisis they can exploit to expand government power. And that crisis is climate change, enforced through carbon footprint monitoring and control. The Biden administration pushed this agenda hard. Carbon tracking, Green New Deal policies, crushing regulations on energy production, subsidies for politically favored industries, all justified by the supposed emergency of climate change, all designed to fundamentally transform the American economy and the American way of life. Thankfully, President Trump is back. He's already rolled back much of the wokeness epidemic that poisoned our culture. He's securing the border and stopping the flood of illegal immigration. And hopefully, he'll be able to put a stop to the carbon footprint agenda before it does even more damage to American prosperity and freedom. Today, we're going to examine exactly what this carbon footprint agenda is, who's pushing it and why, what it would mean for your life if fully implemented, and what we can do to stop it. Because this is not inevitable. This is a choice being imposed by people who want control, and we can refuse to comply.
Courage, compassion, faith, freedom, truth. Welcome to Courage in the Darkness with your host, Philip Roberts. It's time to awaken America.
Let's start by understanding what they're actually trying to implement. The carbon footprint agenda is not just about reducing emissions. It's about creating a comprehensive system for monitoring, tracking, and controlling individual behavior based on environmental impact. Your carbon footprint is supposedly the total amount of greenhouse gases that you're responsible for emitting. This includes direct emissions like driving your car or heating your home, and indirect emissions from the products you buy and the services you use. The agenda is to measure all of this, assign you a carbon budget, and force you to stay within that budget through a combination of taxes, regulations, and direct restrictions. They want to track how much you drive, how much energy you use, what you eat, what you buy, where you travel. Every aspect of your consumption would be measured and monitored. This data would then be used to calculate your carbon footprint and to penalize you if you exceed allowed limits. Some proposals involve carbon credit systems where you're given an allowance of carbon credits and charged credits for various activities. Drive to work? That costs carbon credits. Heat your home in the winter? More credits. Fly to visit family? Even more credits. And when you run out of credits, you either pay steep fees to continue those activities or you simply can't do them. Other proposals involve carbon taxes that make carbon-intensive activities increasingly expensive. Gas prices would rise not because of supply and demand, but because of government-imposed carbon taxes. Electricity bills would increase. Food costs would go up because agriculture and food transportation produce emissions. Everything would cost more as punishment for your carbon footprint. The agenda also includes banning or phasing out technologies and products deemed too carbon intensive. Gas stoves are already being targeted. Gas-powered vehicles will be next. Natural gas heating, gas water heaters. They want to force everyone to electrify everything, regardless of whether that makes sense or whether the electrical grid can handle it. They're pushing electric vehicles hard despite the obvious problems. EVs are expensive, the range is limited, charging infrastructure is inadequate. The batteries are environmentally problematic to produce and dispose of. Cold weather dramatically reduces performance, but none of this matters because the agenda is not about practical solutions. It's about forcing compliance with the preferred technology. The push for renewable energy is similar. Wind and solar, they sound great until you understand their limitations. They're intermittent. They require massive land to use. They need backup from fossil fuel plants. They're expensive. They're inefficient, but we're supposed to restructure the entire energy grid around them because that's what the climate agenda demands. Behind all of this is the assumption that carbon dioxide is pollution, that this must be eliminated. But CO2 is not pollution. It's plant food. It's essential for life on Earth. Higher CO2 levels actually increase plant growth and crop yields. The planet has been much warmer in the past, and life thrived. The idea that current CO2 levels represent an existential crisis is not supported by geological or historical evidence, but questioning any of this gets gets you labeled as a climate denier. Probably a Nazi, too. Who the hell knows with these people? You're accused of being anti-science, even though there's enormous scientific debate about climate sensitivity, feedback mechanisms, the accuracy of climate models, and the cost-benefit analysis of various interventions. The science is settled, they claim, even though science is never settled and predictions keep being wrong. Remember when Al Gore said Arctic ice would be gone by 2013? Remember when we were told coastal cities would be underwater by now? Remember when climate refugees were supposed to number in the hundreds of millions? None of that happened. The predictions were wrong. But instead of admitting error and recalibrating, they just make new predictions that are equally apocalyptic and equally wrong. The carbon footprint agenda is also deeply hypocritical. The elites pushing these policies fly private jets, they own multiple mansions, travel constantly. John Kerry, the Biden administration's climate envoy, has a massive carbon footprint, but lectures everyone else about there. Al Gore's house uses enormous amounts of energy. Climate activists fly to conferences to talk about how everyone else needs to reduce emissions. I'm trying so hard to not laugh right now. But, the rules are for you, not for them. They'll continue their lifestyles, whether you're forced to reduce your standard of living. They'll keep their gas stoves while yours are banned. They'll fly private jets while you're priced out of air travel altogether through carbon taxes. This is about creating a two-tier system where the elite are exempt from the restrictions imposed on everyone else. Sound familiar? Sound like the socialist agenda that's going on in New York and Minnesota and parts of Texas? The parallels between the COVID response and the carbon footprint agenda are striking and terrifying. Both involve government using a supposed crisis to massively expand power and control over individual behavior. Both rely on fear and apocalyptic predictions. Both demand sacrifice from ordinary people while the elites are exempt. Both punish dissent and label questioning as denialism. During COVID, we were told that lockdowns were necessary to flatten the curve and prevent hospital overwhelm. 2 weeks to slow the spread. You guys remember that? Then it was longer. Then it was until we have a vaccine. And then it was until everyone is vaccinated. The goalposts kept moving. The temporary emergency measures became permanent. The carbon agenda works the same way. We need to reduce emissions to prevent catastrophic warming. But no reduction is ever enough. The targets kept getting more aggressive. The timeline keeps accelerating. What was supposed to be gradual transition becomes immediate crisis requiring emergency action. COVID gave us mask mandates that didn't work. The data showed clearly that masks, especially cloth masks, worn by the general public had minimal, if any, effect on transmission. But questioning masks got you banned from social media, kicked out of stores, attacked as anti-science. The masks became symbols of compliance rather than tools of public health. Carbon footprint tracking will be the same. It won't actually make meaningful difference to global climate, but it will become a symbol of compliance. Your willingness to monitor and reduce your carbon footprint will be a test of whether you're a good citizen who cares about the planet or a selfish denier who deserves punishment. COVID vaccine mandates forced people to take experimental treatments as condition of employment. People lost jobs because they wanted bodily autonomy. The government, in partnership with corporations, created a system where you couldn't participate in society without compliance. No jab, no job. No vaccine passport, no entry. Carbon credit systems will work similarly. No compliance with carbon limits, no ability to participate in normal economic life. Want to travel? Show your carbon budget. Want to buy certain products? Prove you have credits available. Want to drive? Your car monitors your usage and shuts down when you exceed allowance. The COVID response showed how quickly rights and freedoms can be eliminated in the name of crisis. Freedom of movement restricted, freedom of assembly banned, freedom of speech suppressed, small businesses destroyed while big box stores stayed open, churches closed while liquor stores were essential. The arbitrariness and hypocrisy were stunning. The carbon agenda will be worse because there's no end to the crisis. COVID at least had the possibility of ending when the virus became endemic and less dangerous. But climate change is presented as a permanent crisis that requires permanent government control. There's no end point where they declare victory and give back the power they've seized. During COVID, dissenters were vilified. Doctors who questioned lockdowns or vaccine mandates were censored. Scientists who presented data contradicting the narrative lost jobs. Media personalities who asked questions were deplatformed. The government coordinated with social media companies to suppress dissent and control the narrative. The same thing is already happening with climate dissent. Scientists who question climate models or the cost of interventions face career consequences. Media that presents skeptical views get accused of disinformation. Social media suppresses content that questions climate orthodoxy. You're only allowed to debate how aggressively to implement the agenda, not whether the agenda itself makes sense. The Biden administration weaponized federal agencies during COVID. OSHA was used to impose vaccine mandates on large employers. The CDC issued eviction moratoriums that had nothing to do with disease control. Federal funding was conditional on compliance with COVID policies. The entire federal bureaucracy was deployed to enforce compliance. The same agencies are being weaponized for the carbon agenda. The EPA creates regulations that effectively ban coal plants and make oil and gas production more difficult. The Department of Energy issues efficiency standards that eliminate appliances people prefer. The Department of Transportation pushes electric vehicle mandates. Every agency is enlisted in advancing the climate agenda regardless of their statutory authority. What's particularly galling is that the COVID measures didn't work. Lockdowns didn't stop the spread. Masks didn't prevent transmission. The vaccines didn't prevent infection or transmission despite promises that they would. States and countries that avoided lockdowns often had better outcomes than those with strict measures. But admitting this is still taboo. The carbon agenda won't work either. Even if the United States eliminated all emissions tomorrow, it would have minimal effect on global temperatures because most emissions come from China, India, and developing countries that aren't going to sacrifice their economic growth for climate goals. But implementing the agenda will destroy American prosperity and freedom without achieving stated goals. So if the carbon footprint agenda won't actually solve climate change and will harm ordinary Americans, why is it being pushed so hard? Who benefits from this? Start with the obvious. Government benefits enormously. The carbon agenda creates justification for massive expansion of government power and bureaucracy. New agencies to monitor carbon, new regulations to enforce, new taxes to collect, new penalties to impose. Every aspect of economic life becomes subject to government oversight and control. Politicians benefit too. Climate crisis gives them emergency powers. It allows them to bypass normal democratic processes because there's no time for debate when the planet is at stake. It creates opportunities for corruption as politicians direct subsidies and contracts to favored industries and donors. The renewable energy industry benefits massively. Wind and solar companies receive enormous government subsidies. They get mandates requiring utilities to buy their power, even when it's more expensive and less reliable than alternatives. They get tax credits and preferential treatment. All of this is justified by the climate agenda. Electric vehicle manufacturers benefit. Tesla and others receive subsidies for every vehicle sold. They get regulatory credits they can sell to competitors. They get government funding for charging infrastructure. They get mandates requiring increasing percentages of vehicles sold to be electric. This is corporate welfare disguised as environmental policy. The financial sector benefits through carbon trading schemes and green investment funds. Wall Street gets new markets to trade in and new fees to collect. Banks get to finance the massive infrastructure spending required for the transition. Investment firms create ESG funds that prioritize climate criteria and charge higher fees. Consulting firms and tech companies benefit from the need to track and monitor carbon footprints. Someone has to create the systems to measure emissions, compile the data, calculate the credits. This creates enormous business opportunities for companies that can position themselves as essential to implementing the agenda. China benefits enormously. They produce most of the solar panels and wind turbines. They control much of the rare earth minerals needed for batteries. They manufacture most of the components for the green economy. The Western countries implementing carbon agenda become more dependent on China, while China continues to build coal plants and expand emissions. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans pay the cost. Energy prices increase, electric bills go up, gas costs more, vehicles become more expensive, appliances are less reliable and more costly to replace. Your standard of living decreases while your cost of living increases. American industry suffers. Manufacturing becomes more expensive due to energy costs and regulations. Company moves operations overseas where environmental regulations are lax. Jobs disappear. The industrial base that's essential for national security erodes. Because this is acceptable collateral damage in the fight against climate change. Rural America is particularly hit hard. Farmers face restrictions on their operations because agriculture produces emissions. Ranchers are targeted because cattle produces methane. People who depend on pickup trucks and need to drive long distances are priced out by gas costs and electric vehicles that don't meet their needs. But rural voters don't matter to the urban progressives pushing the agendas. Energy independence is sacrificed. America was energy independent under Trump's first term. We were producing our own oil and gas. We weren't dependent on hostile nations for energy. The Biden administration deliberately destroyed this by canceling pipelines, restricting drilling, and attacking fossil fuel production. They made us dependent on foreign energy while claiming to care about the environment. The military is weakened. Defense requires enormous amounts of energy. Ships, planes, tanks, all run on fossil fuels. They push to electrify everything. When they push to electrify everything, they create vulnerabilities, forcing the military to prioritize climate considerations over operational effectiveness compromises national security. But environmental virtue signaling is more important than military readiness to these people. The power grid becomes unstable. Wind and solar are intermittent. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, where does power come from? Batteries can't store enough for the grid scale needs. This means either having fossil fuel backup, which defeats the purpose entirely, or accepting blackouts and brownouts. California already experiences this. New York already experiences this. Other states will follow if the agenda continues. Innovation is stifled. When government mandates specific technologies rather than allowing the market to determine what works best, you get suboptimal outcomes. Maybe nuclear power is better than wind and solar. Maybe hydrogen fuel cells are better than lithium batteries. But the government's picked winners and losers. So alternatives don't get developed. Personal freedom is eliminated. When the government monitors your carbon footprint and restricts your behavior based on it, you're no longer free. Your choices about how to live, what to buy, where to travel, all become subject to government approval. This ain't freedom. This is centrally planned economy where bureaucrats make decisions that should be made by individuals and markets. The good news is that President Trump is back, and he understands that the carbon footprint agenda is destructive nonsense. He's already rolled back much of the wokeness that infected our culture during the Biden years. He's securing the border, and he's stopping the invasion of illegal immigrants. He can do the same with the climate agenda. First, he can eliminate the regulations that Biden imposed. The EPA rules targeting coal plants and oil refineries, the Department of Energy efficiency standards, the transportation emissions requirements. All of these were executive actions that can be reversed through executive action. Trump doesn't need Congress to undo much of the damage. He can approve oil and gas drilling on federal lands. Biden restricted access to these resources. Trump can open them back up. He can approve pipeline construction that was blocked for political reasons. He can remove barriers to American energy production and restore energy independence. He can withdraw from or ignore international climate agreements that bind the United States to arbitrary emissions targets. Well, China and India do whatever the hell they want. The Paris Agreement was terrible for America. Trump was right to withdraw from it the first time. He should do so again immediately. He can end subsidies for renewable energy and electric vehicles. If these technologies are viable, they should compete in the market without government support. If they need massive subsidies to survive, that's evidence they're not ready for prime time. Stop picking winners and let the market determine what technologies succeed. He can dismantle all the climate bureaucracy. All the agencies and offices created to advance the carbon agenda can be eliminated or dramatically reduced. The people whose jobs involve pushing climate regulations can be fired or reassigned. The government doesn't need massive bureaucracy devoted to an invented crisis. He can promote nuclear power. If you actually believed climate change was an existential crisis, you'd be enthusiastically supporting nuclear as the only proven technology that can produce large amounts of reliable carbon-free power. But environmentalists oppose nuclear because their agenda is not really about reducing emissions. Trump can overrule them and promote nuclear development. He can expose the corruption in green energy, the subsidies, the crony capitalism, the connections between politicians and the companies receiving government money, the waste and fraud. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Exposing how the carbon agenda enriches the politically connected while harming ordinary Americans will build support for ending it. He can protect American industry from carbon-based regulations that makes us uncompetitive. If other countries aren't following the same rules, American companies are at a disadvantage. Trump can ensure that American businesses can compete globally without being handicapped by climate ideology. He can use the bully pulpit to educate Americans about the cost of the carbon agenda. Most people don't understand how much it'll cost them personally. Most people don't realize that predictions have been consistently wrong. Most people don't know about the hypocrisy of the elites pushing these policies. Trump can explain all of this directly to the American people. He can appoint judges who won't let federal agencies exceed their statutory authority in service of climate ideology. Many climate regulations have been imposed by agencies acting beyond what Congress authorized. Courts staffed with constitutionalist judges can constrain this bureaucratic overreach. He can veto any legislation that advances the carbon agenda. Congress may try to pass Green New Deal type legislation. Trump can ensure it doesn't become law. He can use the veto as a check on congressional climate extremism. He can withhold federal funding from states and cities that implement their own carbon control schemes. California wants to ban gas-powered cars? Fine. But they shouldn't get federal highway money. New York wants carbon taxes? They can fund their own projects without federal support. Most importantly, Trump can change the narrative. For years, we've been told that climate change is the most important issue, that we must sacrifice everything to address it, that anyone questioning this is anti-science. Trump can reject this framing completely and make the case that American prosperity and freedom are more important than the environmental virtue signaling of elites. President Trump can do a lot, but he needs support. And there are things that individuals can do to resist the carbon footprint agenda, regardless of what happens at the federal level. First, refuse to comply with voluntary carbon tracking. Some companies and organizations are asking people to voluntarily track their carbon footprints. Don't do it. Don't give them the data. Don't participate in the system they're trying to build. Once you've voluntarily started tracking, it becomes easier to make it mandatory. Don't buy products or use services that require carbon footprint monitoring. Some apps and services are incorporating carbon tracking features. Don't use them. Send the message to companies that there's no market for this. If enough people refuse to participate, the tracking systems won't be viable. Keep your gas appliances. When your gas stove or water heater or furnace needs replacing, replace it with another gas unit. Don't voluntarily electrify, even though that's what they want you to do. Gas is more reliable, cheaper to operate, and in most cases, it's more efficient. The environmental benefits of electrifying are minimal or non-existent when you account for power plant emissions. Drive whatever vehicle makes sense for your needs. If that's a pickup truck or an SUV, you keep it. Don't let guilt about carbon footprints push you into a vehicle that doesn't work for your situation. If electric works for you, that's great. But don't buy one because of environmental pressure. Buy what makes practical sense. Support energy independence. Support domestic oil and gas production. Support pipeline construction. Support nuclear power. Vote for politicians who prioritize American energy production over environmental ideology. Make energy policy an issue in elections. Oppose carbon taxes at every level. If your state or local government proposes carbon taxes, show up and voice opposition. Organize against it. Make it clear that voters will not tolerate it. Politicians respond to pressure, apply pressure, challenge the narrative. When people talk about carbon footprints and climate crisis, question the assumptions. Ask about the cost of proposed solutions. Point out the failed predictions. Note the hypocrisy of the elites. You don't have to be confrontational, but don't let false narratives go unchallenged. Educate yourselves and others about climate science. Understand the actual data rather than media hysteria. Learn about the limitations of climate models. Read about historical climate variation. Know the facts so you can respond when confronted with climate propaganda. Support businesses that resist the climate agenda. If a company refuses to implement ESG scoring or carbon tracking, support them. If they continue producing products that climate activists want banned, buy from them. Use your purchasing power to reward businesses that resist. Remove your money from banks and investment funds that prioritize climate criteria over returns. If your bank is denying loans to fossil fuel companies, or your investment fund is divesting from oil and gas for political reasons, find alternatives. Let them know why you're leaving. Homeschool your children, or be very involved in monitoring what they're taught about climate. Schools are indoctrinating kids with climate hysteria amongst all of the other stuff that they're doing. They're teaching that anyone who questions this agenda is evil. Counter this at home. Teach your kids to think critically about what they're told. Join organizations fighting the climate agenda. There are think tanks, legal foundations, and advocacy groups working to resist climate overreach. Support them financially and get involved with their efforts. Individual actions matter, but organized resistance is more effective. Run for local office or support candidates who will resist climate mandates at the local level. Much of the carbon agenda is implemented at state and local levels. City councils, city boards, state legislatures. These bodies make decisions about energy, building codes, and other policies that affect carbon emissions. Get good people in these positions. Prepare for the possibility that the agenda moves forward despite resistance. If you live somewhere likely to implement carbon or strict carbon controls, consider moving to a state that won't. If your job is vulnerable to climate regulations, think about alternatives. Don't be caught unprepared. Most importantly, refuse to be intimidated. They want you to feel guilty about your carbon footprint. They want you to feel like you're destroying the planet by living a normal life. Reject this. You have the right to heat your home, drive your car, and live your life without being made to feel like a criminal for existing. The carbon footprint agenda is the next great expansion of government power after COVID. They learned from the pandemic that they can use crisis to seize control over individual behavior. They learned that most people will comply if you scare them enough. They learned that dissent can be suppressed by labeling it as denialism or disinformation. Now they're applying those lessons to climate. They're creating systems to monitor and control every aspect of your life based on your carbon footprint. They're pushing regulations that will make energy more expensive, vehicles more costly, and your standard of living lower. They're sacrificing American prosperity and freedom to pursue unattainable environmental goals that wouldn't make a difference even if achieved. The rhetoric is getting worse. The demands are becoming more extreme. The timeline is accelerating. What was supposed to be gradual transition is now emergency that requires immediate sacrifice. And through it all, the elites are pushing this agenda. Continue their high carbon lifestyles while demanding you reduce yours. But we can stop this. President Trump is back, and he is the authority to roll back much of what Biden imposed. He can restore American energy independence. He can eliminate destructive regulations. He can reject the climate hysteria and focus on what actually matters, which is American prosperity and security. But Trump needs support. He needs Americans to demand that he resists the carbon agenda. He needs Congress to back him up rather than undermining him. He needs courts to constrain bureaucratic overreach. He needs states to refuse to implement their own versions of the agenda. And individuals need to resist in their own lives. Refuse to participate in carbon tracking. Keep your gas appliances. Drive what makes sense for your needs. Support businesses that resist. Oppose carbon taxes. Challenge the narrative. Don't let them make you feel guilty for living normally. The carbon footprint agenda is not about saving the environment. It's about control. It's about creating a system where government monitors your behavior and restricts your choices. It's about reducing your standard of living while enriching the politically connected. It's about transforming America from a free society into a managed society where bureaucrats make decisions that should be made by individuals. This is being sold as necessary to prevent climate catastrophe. But the predictions have been wrong repeatedly. The models are unreliable. The proposed solutions don't work. The costs far outweigh the benefits. And the countries not following these policies are the ones actually increasing emissions. We're being asked to sacrifice prosperity, freedom, and security based on flawed science and failed predictions. To benefit elites who exempt themselves from the rules they impose on others. To enrich industries that can't survive without government subsidies. To empower bureaucrats who want control over our lives. The answer is no. No to carbon tracking, no to carbon taxes, no to forced electrification, no to energy restrictions, no to government control over individual choices. No to sacrificing America for a climate agenda that won't work and won't make a difference. President Trump gets this. He understands that American energy independence is more important than Paris Agreement commitments. He understands that affordable energy is essential for prosperity. He understands that freedom means making your own choices about how to live rather than having government dictate based on carbon budgets. He's already fighting back against wokeness and illegal immigration. He can fight back against the carbon agenda too. And with our support, he will. The climate hysterics had their moment. The Biden administration pushed their agenda as hard as they could. But now, adults are back in charge, and common sense will prevail. Support Trump's efforts to dismantle the carbon control system. Demand that your representatives resist climate extremism, use your voice, your vote, and your purchasing power to fight back, and refuse to comply with systems designed to monitor and control your behavior. The carbon footprint agenda is bad policy based on false premises pushed by people who want control. We can stop it. We must stop it. The alternative is a future where government dictates how you live based on arbitrary environmental criteria that have nothing to do with actual environmental benefit and everything to do with control. So choose freedom, choose prosperity, choose America first, and reject the carbon footprint agenda completely.